Hi, this is Aaron Azrod, and welcome to the 119th episode of the Truth Island podcast. A trend that traces its origins all the way back to the inception of the Industrial Revolution is the increased feelings of alienation that modern workers often feel. On one hand, we all wish to feel valuable and enjoy seeing the fruits of our labor. A contractor can point to houses that they helped build. A doctor can relish in the fact that they may have helped extend someone's life, even for just a few more years. And an author can take pride in the fact that their work may have entertained and inspired people. Despite what anyone might tell you, we as humans love to work. We love engaging in activities that give our lives meaning and purpose. So much so that any percentage increase in the unemployment rate leads to an increase of suicides by roughly 40,000. Even among retirees, studies show that volunteer work and some forms of part-time labor can actually increase one's lifespan. However, an important caveat that most research participants disclose is that it's not the work itself that keeps people alive, but the sense of purpose that work gives them. Arguably, the most important question of why should I be doing this is often the question that is the least answered in the workplace. Millennials and other young workers have increasingly found themselves in work environments that often delegate tasks with unclear goals and very long work hours. For those working in white-collar settings, it has ipso de facto become the norm that employees be available at all times of the day to answer their email or return to their computers to revise an assignment. But despite our love of data, employers seem to care little that studies show that employees are at their most productive for only 2 hours and 53 minutes per day. While that doesn't mean a person can't work more than 3 hours, the amount of creative work that any given person can produce begins to diminish with each passing hour. Prior to the pandemic, some employers even demanded that employees stick around the office merely as a contingency in case a client complained where some irregularity came up. The most egregious offender happens most notably in the field of law, where new associates are often required to clock in 70 to 80-hour work weeks, so that these hours can be turned over to the clients as billable hours, even if the results of these efforts in no way enhance a client's legal case. While some might rationalize this as simply the game one must play to earn a living, the removal of meaning is perhaps not something that we are equipped to work without. Joining me to share her journey leaving corporate America and to announce the start of her very own podcast, Corporate Quitter, I am joined by Gabby.
Hi, Erin. Thanks for having me again. um, yeah, so I feel like us being in the place that we are post COVID and just us being millennials and the Gen Zers of the world, we are seeing a different dynamic play out in terms of, how we work, where we work, when we work, and also something that our generations before us haven't considered is, self-care and actually going to the gym and eating the food and really taking care of ourselves, but also taking into consideration that we're constantly on the clock because we have computers in our pockets, which is our cell phones, which is something they didn't have before. So, right, we all love it, but at the same time, plenty of us probably hate it. Really.
It's funny. It's like I watched the documentary on Netflix recently, The Social Dilemma.
Oh my God, it's so good, but it's
It
like
is.
scary because it's terrifying, really.
It absolutely is. And by the time I was done watching it, I said to myself, I really feel like getting a flip phone all of a sudden. That was like the right level of technology, like around like 2000, when if you wanted to look something up, you could, but you had to go home and sit behind a computer to do it. And it's okay to take a long walk and just wonder who was that actor. Just having that little mystery, even just for a little while, I think is okay. I think it actually makes our brain a little sharper and a little bit more creative. But
Definitely.
again, that's like a whole nother issue in itself. But I think that the computer in our pocket at all times is very dangerous when it comes to our relationship with work, because we need that separation. And not to go into a giant history lesson here, but in the early part of the 20th century, labor unions, collective bargaining, all of these organizations really fought hard for the 8-hour workday. It was something that was believed, 8 hours to work, 8 hours to rest, and 8 hours for ourselves, right? And when you really think about it, that's actually the perfect day. You have your 8 hours of work, you have 8 hours to take care of your kids, go to the gym, buy nutritious food, or just, watch the news for an hour, and then 8 hours to sleep. And I think that for a while, we had hit the sweet spot. I think when we were following those laws of 8, 8, and 8, we really were happy. I mean, nothing was ever perfect, but I think we were a lot better off under that system than we are today. And those walls have sort of kind of just magically been deteriorated, and we can definitely talk a lot about the transition from people mostly working in blue collar occupations to white collar occupations and what that means. But I think that it's not only the extra hours, but on top of it, it's sometimes you're being called to do things and you don't necessarily see the purpose as to what you are creating. And I'm wondering if that's something that you felt your last voyage into in the workplace.
Definitely. And it's funny because about 3 years ago, I was working as an executive assistant for an asset management company, which, being in New York City, it's very, very demanding. A lot of time is put into it. It's not an easy job, and yet I loved it because the people I worked with were awesome and they were very respectful. I want to say I lucked out because not a lot of people had the same experience. But I had purpose in that, and that's what made it fun. It's the people that I was working for, I genuinely cared about them. So it felt good for me as a nurturer to quote unquote nurture them in the way of like doing expense reports and making sure they caught their flights and booking the cabs and making the meetings. But then about, within the last year, which coincidentally COVID happened. So that's, I'm sure, part of the reason why. But my last role when I got promoted was in marketing, which was super fun, but it was just, there was no sort of passion in it like I had expected there to be being an assistant. So I guess I was working in real estate, which super cool, really creative, very fun, especially being in New York City, learned a ton. But as time went on, I realized I'm just making these, white men richer. Literally, like I'm just helping make these people, these investors richer. This is not helping the little man. If anything, it's pushing the little man out because we're a huge, giant real estate firm and we're not giving anyone a shot, right? It's our job. We have to fill our space, and we're really just working with large companies to, it's just for me as someone who likes to give back. And like, I think I had done a lot of volunteer work when I was working at this company and realized it had filled the void of not having that passion or that purpose or that fulfillment of like giving back. And that's why I did it so much. But then being in this role is really when it kind of came full circle of like, oh, wait, this isn't actually helping anyone that I know. It's not helping to do anything positive, positively in my community. It's just kind of making people richer, and it's not like I'm helping like a philanthropy group make money so that they can go out and like feed the homeless or like provide clothing for people, children in need. Like it's not doing anything in the way of us, regular people, which bothered me.
Wow. Okay. So we actually have a lot to unpack. Now, let me ask you this. When you were working as an executive assistant, was that with the same company or with a different company?
So technically the same company, but it was within a different department, if you will.
Okay. Now, that's well, the first thing I want to think that's interesting that I didn't, I'm glad that you brought this up. It didn't even come to my mind, is just even if you're working in a place and you don't know exactly what the end goal is, because you were still working for the same real estate company, but just having those interactions of like, hey, Gabby, that was an awesome hotel that you booked me in. Hey, Gabby, that was a great, cab ride or whatever. Just having those micro doses of meaning where you could see the result, or you could see someone expressing gratitude or appreciation for something that you performed, even if you weren't visualizing like the big picture of what it is that you were doing. Even that, those little micro interactions even can build meaning into your day.
Definitely. So I, like you, used to be a teacher, and so my wins were my students' wins. So in this world, even though, right, I'm the younger one. I was like this, like, really peppy 20-year-old, like serving these like 40 to 50-year-old, like, guys, in this industry, which is super, it's tax, it's capital markets, it's treasury, it's like very like black and white. And here I am like injecting enthusiasm into it. And they're like my students where they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. So for me, there was a huge return on investment, so to speak, for me putting in all that effort. 100%. I'm still friends with them, and like we have such a great relationship, and I couldn't have asked for anything better in that, so that scenario.
And the thing about, and the thing that kind of always makes me scratch my chin is that, like, companies will complain like, oh man, I wish we could pay you more. I wish we could give you more vacation days and yada, yada,
Oh my
yada.
God.
Right. Yeah, but
But then
they owe,
it's like, have you ever seen that meme where it's like, oh, we're not going to pay you more, we're not going to hire more employees, but we'll give you a pizza party. You're like, wow, like that's amazing, but like, no, it's not. We don't want that. Like, we don't want yoga in the workplace. Just give me more money. Like, I need to pay my bills. Come on.
yeah, right. No, exactly. I think a lot of people, I think those perks, like, having like Nature Valley bars or whatever are really cheap compared to, like, a better dental plan or something like that. Like, in the long run, they're saving a lot more money. What always astonishes me is that at the very least, those, hey, Gabby, thank you so much. All of that stuff is extremely cheap. I feel like that stuff is so cheap, but I see a lot of complaints of even that stuff beginning to kind of fall by the wayside. Like those thank yous are like, hey, you really did a great job the other day, or hey,
Yeah.
I really appreciate the fact that you decided to stay late. Because from what I'm hearing, it's almost as if cultures, especially in New York City, cultures are being created where it's not a thank you for staying late. It's why aren't you staying
Yeah.
late? And that I think is something that's radically different.
Yeah. And you start to feel really guilty because they basically make you feel terrible if you're not putting in those extra hours, even though it's funny though, because right, they'll say like, I really want you to prioritize self-care, like your sleep is really important, I want you to have a life outside of work. Like they will berate me with saying that over and over again, but then when push comes to shove, like 5 p.m. I sign off because I go for a run like I was going for a run almost every single day at 5 p.m. when my laptop would shut. And then as I'm get on a run, I would get calls and they're like, where are you, we need you, where are you? And it's like, well, you know where I am every day at 5 p.m. If you don't tell me beforehand that you need something from me, which by the way, I will make myself available if it's an emergency, but I need to get my run in. Like I put in my 8 hours, I did what I needed to do. If you couldn't get back to me because you were busy and you didn't manage your calendar well, don't get pissed at me. That's not cool. I have a life.
And this is like something that this is real. This is what you're touching upon, something really important, because when we made this shift from blue collar to white collar work for a lot of us, right? We stopped being paid by the hour. And what that meant is, when our ancestors, right? And look, some people still work, and maybe some people still earn great living doing blue collar work, and I think that's awesome. And even as a teacher, I sometimes had to clock in, and even when I was working hourly jobs, I kind of like hourly jobs because if you go over that 40 hours or you go over that 8 hours a day, it's like you got to get your time and a half. And when we sort of made this transition to white collar work, the definitions got messed up because originally to have a salary meant you were like a vice president. It meant you were a CFO. It meant you were a CEO. It meant you were a high level manager. And then you were exempt from overtime because and in the law, by definition, it says a manager is somebody who supervises and manages. If you're managing large groups of people, then you are exempt from getting overtime. And we're talking, you should be making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And fair
Even
enough,
more
okay?
than that,
Yeah,
like,
in New
but
York
again, you're
City,
like, yeah, exactly.
there's something about that I think was intrinsic. Okay, like you want to have no overtime, you want to be available around the clock, but you get this kick-ass title and huge pay and bonuses. Fair enough. What's kind of unfair in this equation is that the low-level employee or the entry-level employee who doesn't really manage anybody is also being asked to take up that same burden or the same requirements without the increased compensation and without like the glorious title, or, and supervising 20 people and all that other stuff. And I think something about that is somewhere along the line, that's a bargain that we never made.
Yeah. And I think in a lot of ways we're also, I don't want to say losing our way, but I think in a sense we're forgetting what it's like to be without our work, like to be individuals without our work. Like, oh, this is my hobby. This is what I like to do outside of work. Now it's like we just go to work and we come home and binge Netflix and like ordering food. Like that's honestly no, but that for being in the city, most people that I knew, it was you go to work, you work as long as you have to, then immediately you're so tired, so you just go and either get drinks with someone and then stuff your face with whatever pizza is at the at the bar, and then you go home and crash and do it all again the next day, or you basically do the same thing but from home, so you kind of miss out on. I mean, the socialization is great, but you miss out on, again, the 888, where you're building on your life in other meaningful ways than just working.
Absolutely. I mean, the number of young teachers that I would work with who in the teachers lounge would just casually say, yeah, I finished grading these papers until like 11 p.m. last night, and then I like while like polishing off a bottle of wine or something. I'm like, what? No, and I'm talking about like a young like a young lady who was like 5'3" and 110 pounds, just like polishing off a bottle of wine, and I'm like, my goodness, like that's not natural and that's not right.
Yeah.
And maybe people like that in the past were like statistical outliers, but I'm hearing stories like this more and more often. Well, what's interesting is that it's kind of history repeating itself, because one of the reasons that we had prohibition, people don't even realize this, is that all these men were working in these factories like 10, 12, 13, 14-hour days. And this was brutal work, like absolutely brutal, like on your feet, shoveling coal, working behind the same machine like for 14 hours. And what would these guys do after they got off from work? They would go to the bar and get completely shit-faced. And sadly, they also did some other terrible stuff, like take it out on their wives and on their children and so forth. And that was, and what happened was is that society came together and they formed the temperance movement, and they banned alcohol, and they said, all right, well, if we just get rid of alcohol, then that will solve the problem. But that was never the problem. The problem was not the excessive drinking. It was actually the working conditions that were so damn horrendous that forced people to drink crazy, like there was no tomorrow, because people just managed to skirt that law and find alcohol in other ways. And that's exactly, we're literally basically repeating the same problems that we were facing 100 years ago. It's not that you need a law to ban alcohol. It's that we need to reclaim that 8 hours so that we don't like just completely lose ourselves in a drunken stupor every night.
Yeah. It's hard because you don't want to say alcohol is 100% the problem, right? Because it is fun when you use it for celebrations and kind of like what it's supposed to be. Like, I remember I think it was my mom, she was saying her grandfather, they'd have Sunday dinner, right? Once a week they have maybe a small glass of wine, and also the wine glasses used to be so much smaller, like it was like a fraction of the size that we have now, and like the goblet, it's like literally a goblet, it's so huge.
I think of like medieval times or
No,
something.
literally, but if you look, it's fun if you look at actual pictures between what was considered a serving size back then, and that's for food, alcohol, coffee. I mean, you get these like little tiny glasses, and then you look at now and it's like basically half a bottle of wine in one cup, and it's like that's no wonder people are hammered all the time. Like you're serving, no, really, your portions are so. You ever like sit and you're in the zone, you're doing work or you're watching TV or whatever, and you already like you have a bowl of popcorn or something, and like you're just eating it, but you're not realizing you're eating it, and then all of a sudden it's gone. It's like the same exact thing.
Yes, yes, yeah, absolutely. And get to this stage where you want to get off work and you want to attend to things that are, like you said, you went for a run. I think that's a fantastic way to spend, your after work hours. Or you want to, let's say you want to do meal prep, like I think meal
Hmm.
prep is really important. Some people will make a meal and then freeze it and it will last for like 3 or 4 days or something, but that's really tiring and that's really consuming.
Yeah.
That really takes a lot out of you. So I think what a lot of people do is that they are working these crazy hours, so they obviously order the most unhealthiest food possibly available, which obviously is 34% of Americans are now obese, and then they consume alcohol, and this is destroying our spirit, our mind, our soul, and our bodies all
Yeah.
at the same time. Whereas if we just had those 8 hours to ourselves, we a lot of this damage would not be happening right now.
Yeah, and it compounds over time too. So, you skip one night of meal prep and then it becomes a month and then all of a sudden you find yourself in this huge rut. It's problematic. How do you even do yourself out? Meanwhile, you're still trying to work all these crazy hours. It's not great. But I will say, like, I haven't really, well, not that I haven't told anyone this, but so I have not been a big drinker really my whole life. I just like I'm also like 4'11", like 105 pounds. Like I could not finish a bottle of wine. Like that woman, I would be on the
One Bud
floor like
Light and you're
vomiting.
done. That's it.
Literally, I'm good. Like I have like two White Claws and I'm like, I'm in my happy place. But so last summer, I mean, granted it was COVID, but because of how things were going at work, I was finding that I actually, for the first time, was actively buying alcohol and having a drink or two every single night.
Wow. Yeah.
So like I would go for my run, right? I do my run, but then I like get back and I'm like, okay, the rest of the night I'm gonna drink and like hang out because I deserve it, right? Because today was so stressful and I've worked so long and I'm exhausted and this is it. And that's like to me now, I think about it and it's frustrating that I even came to that, but I can understand if I was dealing with my level of stress is probably is not the same as someone who's a new mother who's working a corporate job or husband's working a corporate job. They don't have help. Like someone like that who's, in our age group, it's probably I can't imagine the stress level. It's nothing compared to mine.
Oh yeah, no, and both of us are speaking as, younger people with no children, and I can only imagine that as you get older, as your level of responsibility, I mean, you get hit on so many ways. You have some people are dealing with children and they're dealing with ailing parents who just, don't have that. And again, if we look at this traditionally, you could kind of swing having one breadwinner at one point. So you could have one person that's the sole breadwinner, and then that could be the person that just comes home from work exhausted and then just reclines on the lazy boy and just, goes into
You
a
love your lazy boy.
yeah, right. That's a recurrent that's my recurring thing that I just dive into, like, oh, right.
But I
And
mean, I
and
do understand it. Like back then maybe it wasn't Lazy Boy, but you had the armchair, and it was like Dad's armchair because he'd work a full day and he'd come home and plant himself in there because he wants to decompress. Like I totally get it, and it's almost sad that we don't even have the option to have a one income household anymore, unless you're doing something so outside the box where you created your own business and it's super scalable and et cetera, or you happen to be a CEO of a company, but like who do you know that has a single house, like single working household? I don't. I have no,
especially not, yeah, especially, like houses up in New York City, even Long Island, they're expensive, and it's like it's just impossible to swing a house with one person working. It's just not possible. So you end up having both parents that are working, or even in the worst case, you have, single mothers who are working, and they're not really making a go of it at all because, they have so much going against them. But
hmm
even when you do have two parents working, it's like there needs to be somebody. I'm not saying that it has to necessarily be the wife. It could be the husband.
hmm
It could be both partners both working a part-time job. It's really it's really between husband and wife to decide who wants to go to work and who wants to stay home. Seriously, no judgment here on my part. But when you don't have the option of having one person kind of taking care of those domestic things like meal prep, cleaning the house, making sure the kids are doing their homework, everything begins to society, I think, begins to crumble at the wayside because
Yeah.
these things are really, really important. And if we don't, to think that people could not only, we're asking people to not only work 40 hours, we're asking them to work 50 to 60 hours. And then on top of that, take care of all of these domestic chores that used to be handled by just one person.
Yeah. I mean, even for a single person, it's a lot for myself. Well, it was a lot for myself when I was working the 50 or 60 hours as an executive assistant. And then I'd come home, quickly scarf down food. And then my entire weekend is I'm doing laundry, I'm going shopping, I'm doing, all the errands that I need to do. And like, then Saturday night comes around and my friends are like, do you want to go out for drinks? And I'm like, hell no. Like, I'm so tired. Like, I still have to all tomorrow, all Sunday to do more stuff. Like, it just, and imagine if you had to like bring your kids to guitar practice, then you had to like get this and do that, and then you got to worry about your grandfather who's living at home or whatever it is. Like, I don't know. I feel like we're really not in a great place. Like, we're definitely things are changing because people are recognizing that this is all BS. Like, it's complete nonsense. The fact that we're living in these conditions and we're so far ahead in society, like, it should almost be the opposite. We should be getting better, not worse. But it's definitely going to take some time. But I'm hopeful that our generation and the generation before it, Gen Z, we're really pushing to maximize on self-care, pay people accordingly, really push for those, things to be affordable. I mean, I was just talking about this the other day with my friend. Like, it's so messed up that, you have these bankers, granted, right? They're dealing with money, so they should be making a lot. But then you have teachers and nurses and all these people who are like doing such good for the world and really setting the stage for how the planet is going to either continue to be in a good state or regress as, people get older. I don't know. It seems like we don't give them enough credit or pay them enough or applaud them enough. If anything, COVID was great because people finally got to see, like, wow, if it wasn't for the nurses, if it wasn't for the teachers, if it wasn't for the, like, we would all be screwed. And the grocery workers, like, who in their right mind would ever think, like, oh my God, I'm so thankful that this essential worker who works at a grocery store is so important. Like,
Mm.
before COVID, probably no one would acknowledge that person. You know what I'm saying? They're just, which is sad. I probably wouldn't, it would go over my head as well.
Absolutely. I think that the pandemic has I'm hoping that it's made the invisible visible for the first time ever. And that we even I'm hoping that teachers who have been teaching through Zoom, I kind of hope that maybe just a parent walks by and says, wow, this person deals with my difficult kid every single day and actually gets them to do work. Like, I can't even make my kid make their bed, but this teacher person over here is getting my little Johnny over here to read like 3 paragraphs or something. So I think that if I'm hoping, I have spoken to teachers who are working during the pandemic, and I've heard a lot of crazy stories about parents being involved, but I'm hoping that there are some positive stories in that as well, and that people see the professionals who really do the most important jobs. I always think it's crazy that, and I've mentioned this before, that paramedics get paid so little. Like, they get paid,
Right?
they
I
get
don't
paid like
understand.
they
Like,
get paid like no, their starting salary I think is like 35 or 40,000 a year. This is and a paramedic's job, and I've said this before, a paramedic's job is so important that if they lift you the wrong way, if you get hit by a car or something like that, God forbid, if they just lift you the wrong way and your neck twists in the wrong way, you will be paralyzed for life.
yeah,
That's the person that's only worth $40,000 a year. If they just lift you up the wrong way. I mean, our priorities are completely bonkers, in
yeah,
this world, and in terms of what we value. And it's almost as if, like, I was going to kind of circle around to the issue of purpose and meaning, but I think it's interesting to start that some of the jobs that have the most purpose and meaning, teachers, nurses, paramedics, pay the least in our society. I mean, what does that tell us?
yeah, yeah. I mean, capitalism. I mean, like, really, when you think about just like, it all goes back to who makes the most money, really.
Yeah.
If it's not contributing economically, I don't know if us, like, societally here, see the benefit of it, at least using the current or previous model we've been on. Because if you look at other countries, I mean, I forget which one, but there's, anything in Europe, I've heard of people, like, the big joke is like, what's something that shows you that you're American? The big joke is like, oh, here you have to like fight for 3 months maternity or paternity leave, but like in the UK, like, you'll get a year and no one questions anything. Like, imagine, like, you could just have a baby and like no one's gonna. I mean, I've heard of people who were literally on maternity leave and were like yelled at for not coming back at the 2.5 month mark, even though they still had another half a month, and they got fired for it and they couldn't do anything about it because it wasn't in writing. It was over a phone. That's America. Like, what the hell? Where, like, what, why is it happening? Why is that shouldn't be like that?
Yeah, wow. And I mean, we're getting all over the place here, but
Sorry.
no, 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 no,
There's
no,
so
no, no,
many
no.
things about like the workforce
There's
that I just feel like are not like working at all.
there was just a study published that birth rate is on decline right now. So we're
Oh
actually
yeah.
having a lot less, and some experts chalk this up to, like, well, it's the pandemic, people aren't dating, they can't go on those Tinder dates or whatever. But that's not necessarily the case, because these trends were already in decline before the pandemic. Like people were having less kids and so forth. And it's like reasons that you just described, like, well, geez, I don't know if I'm going to get my full maternity paternity leave, that are influencing people. Or, geez, I can't afford more than a studio apartment. Is that really an environment conducive to raising a newborn? You know, like
Yeah.
all three or four of us, like in this like little apartment or something. So all of these things are kind of, you know, kind of weighing at people. And I think, you know, they call us whiny, but I'm like, we're only whining about stuff that people whined about 100 years ago. Like people literally were whining about these things, you know, people were literally let's use the word instead of whining, fighting for these things 100 years ago. And now we
Hmm.
find ourselves having to refight many of these same battles. And it's, you know, it's not good, needless to say. Okay. I want to kind of transition to this idea of when you shifted to the role in working in real estate and this idea of the loss of meaning. Can you tell me a little bit more about how, like maybe when you would go home and you were taking your jog or you were having, you know, another cocktail, tell me about like how you processed yourself, because I said in my intro that if you are a carpenter, and I've spoken to carpenters before, and I've spoken to people, I met a guy once who did marble tiles. He would actually go into kitchens and bathrooms and put marble tiles, which is pretty, you know, hey, it's a grueling job. But he was so proud of his work. He carried all of the houses he worked on his phone, and he'd be like, "Guy, let me show you this house I worked on." And he would have all these pictures on his phone, and he was really excited. And his craftsmanship was like spot on. And I think that even if your job has a lot of hard work or drudgery, having that meaning can sometimes, at least you like, all right, well, look at what I created. How did it feel when you couldn't find like the purpose of what you were doing?
I was not in a good place last year. Like, I mean, it was really, really challenging for me to, I feel like I spent a majority of me being in this role, which was about a year, contemplating if this was even a me issue or if it was a job issue. Like, I really was just, trying to figure out if, I was the problem. I needed to work better with my team. I needed to learn more skills, like going through the whole list until I really realized, like, deep down in my gut, like, this is not the place to be. But I think a big, big part of my disliking of it was the people I was working with. They just were not great to work with. They made things very, very difficult. Similarly to with your carpenter kind of explanation of like him being really proud about the work that he did, I didn't really get credit for the things that I was doing. My boss would kind of take the credit for it, or it was not at all what I had expected it to be, coming from an assistant role, which I've been told many, many times is like the bottom of the barrel, like you are the gum on the bottom of the shoe. And to see role reversal in something that I'm supposed to be put on a pedestal because I'm doing marketing real estate, which is so cool. Like, I don't know. It blew my mind that it would be such a 360, really.
That's, you know, that's one thing that was actually a surprise to me, is that I always thought that the people on the bottom get treated the worst, and then as you move up, you know, your job gets softer and more cushionier. And maybe that's true to some degree, but I noticed that when you're sort of in the middle of the triangle, things get really fierce, like really, 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 people become, because when there's something like, when you're not really, really on the top, but you're sort of in the middle, you have something to lose. You're still ambitious and you want to get ahead, but then you're afraid of falling behind. And people do really nasty, cutthroat things to each other. They throw people under the bus. They jump in and steal the credit. And you know, that could have been like something that could have been like a 13, 14-hour day to you, just instantly became someone else's ticket to the executive suite. And that's something that, you know, I think that these leave like psychological scars on people. Like this is like, this psychologically scars
Yeah.
people, and it's so unnatural to how it is that we as humans actually function in this world. Like I don't think that in a natural world, this is how we behave. But when we're constantly being told, if you don't step up, we're going to get rid of you, or if you don't step up, or this is your third warning or whatever, you know, I've heard, you know, I love that phrase. It's your third
I've
warning or whatever.
it's so like you almost feel like you're put in timeout. Like I have never really had that happen to me before until I entered this role. And it was not only like It's just so degrading. Also, when you know you've given your heart and soul and you've been told by so many people you're doing such a good job, I love what you're doing, and then all of a sudden this one person who happens to be your manager just literally shits on you every single day, like any chance she gets like to tell you something negative and then tries to sugarcoat and be like, "Oh, but you're doing so well, like you're taking such blah blah blah, you're taking such initiative, like this is great." Oh, but you suck. Like, what? I don't understand. Is this criticism? Like, I don't, are you trying to praise me? This isn't cool. And then I never thought in the job and the company I was working for that there'd be such animosity to come from this specific person who on the outside seemed to be so pleasant, and she advocated for so many amazing things, and she's did all this volunteer work and is supposed to be revered as this kind of like goddess, if you will, in this role in this department. And it scarred me. Like, I don't want to be friends. I don't want to even acknowledge her. I don't want to people similar to her. I don't want to be connected to. I mean, now I'm at a place where I've kind of reflected a bit, processed it, but I just, man, I can't even wrap my head around it. Like, I would not wish that on the world for anyone. The throwing
Yeah.
under the bus and I can't. It's not great.
No, absolutely. And one other dynamic that, when I was younger, I didn't even see, and now that I'm a little bit older, I kind of realize it, is that sometimes I would just kind of like, I would work these long hours and then I would like kind of beat my head against the wall, like, what the heck is going on here? And one thing that I was reading about is that there's also this tendency that if you have a manager and they kind of see that you are shining a bit too brightly, they
Yes.
themselves get very threatened. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like they,
So that I definitely we're so similar in a lot of ways of like taking initiative and being very headstrong, and like I'm not afraid to ask questions. I'm not afraid to like interject and give my thoughts about something. And at first I think she enjoyed that because I brought some spice to the campaigns we were working on and all of that. But then as time went on, it seemed like she was continually putting me in places where she would withhold information, and then I'd go to do whatever project it is and not have that piece of information. So then when I finish it, my SVP is like, what is this? This is garbage. This is not what we asked for. I'm not happy about this. Like, be all mad. And I'm thinking, but I was told to do it exactly like this. And then my manager on the side is like, oh, you should have, you should be a better listener. You should take better note. Like all these things. And here I am thinking I'm the problem when it's you've just been like, and the thing is too, she's not even aware of it. She's just doing it because she's such a like superstar and she wants to be the shining star, be the rock star of the group, that she doesn't even realize that she's actually undermining everything I'm doing just to stay at the top.
yes.
And now she has her fancy title, that she got this year, and like, woohoo, I got my business card. I'm like, great, you can have it. Like, good luck to you. Like, I don't need that at all.
Now, this is something that I think it kind of upends the mentor mentee, or teacher and student kind of relationship that we see a lot in movies, we read a lot about in philosophy. And usually the idea behind this is that the mentor teaches the student so that the student can one day surpass the master, or transcend that. And it's not like this thing where if you treat your student very well, or you treat your mentee very well, when they do surpass you, they'll remember you as being that really inspirational force. So like, for example, if you were, let's say, to become like the vice president of the company, you'll look back at your time under her and be like, hey, you were so good to me. And then you kind of take care of each other. Like, that's the way it should work. And what I don't understand is why people think, oh my God, this one is going to just usurp me. She's going to take my place. I'm going to be X'd. And then when she's in charge, she's going to make my life. It's like, you're going to get back whatever it is that you brought in. Whatever it is that you trickled down is going to be the same thing that rains on you. So if you treat your subordinates with respect, and again, like I said, you might have an underling that's really trying to stab you behind the back. These things happen, I get it. But generally speaking, if you treat people below you very, very well, one, develop a reputation as being a wonderful mentor and as someone that people can confide in and tell secrets to and learn from, and that just makes your value go up, because now even if you're not doing that same job, you can kind of then be transitioned to like being a trainer or a mentor of some sort, and that's really awesome itself. And when those people get to your level or surpass you, they will take care of you if you took care of them. That used to be a part of, like, I think the fabric of any kind of relationship, is that you took care of the people below you. It's basically like the relationship between parent and child. The parent should not be afraid that their child is going to surpass them, because they will. They're younger than you, and they're younger. They're going to live longer than you. But the goal is that when they do surpass you, they take care of you. And somehow we've got this twisted notion in our head, is that we got to keep everyone below me as low as humanly possible.
Yeah. I wonder if it has to do with sort of if you push too hard in a way that doesn't make them be in their place, that makes them feel comfortable, they're doing things how they normally do, like nothing has changed. Some people, they don't like change, and those red flags immediately go up. So I think that's part of it, is if you bring something new to the table, yeah, it's exciting, but then once you start really digging in there, maybe it's like, ooh, like, no, we like doing things how we're doing it. It doesn't need to be changed. We can go, we've done this, done it this way for this long, we don't need to do anything else. And that is probably true in a lot of scenarios. You don't necessarily need to change anything, but most people need to get out of their own way too. So it's a combination of things, I'm sure, but I think that has to change as a big issue for people too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, believe me, I did not have a lot of good mentors in my time, teaching. But I had one lady she was pretty good, and she was really good at pushing me out of my comfort zone. Really good at doing that, because she said, "Aaron, you need to try this, and I don't care if you fail doing it." That was actually a
Wait,
game.
you had that at a job? A job? Really?
Yeah,
I don't know if I've ever really 100% had someone say that to me, like, well, especially being in corporate. Maybe like at a startup I did, but not so much, especially not at the last job I worked at.
yeah,
Um, but that's awesome. That's
yeah.
so awesome.
No, and what that did, like she wanted me basically to change my lessons around, like, she wanted me to try some new things, and I was a little hesitant and reluctant. But the fact that she gave me permission to fail and she wouldn't judge it or whatever, she was just that excited, or that she had that urgency, and she wanted me to try this new thing, that it didn't matter if it blew up. Just the fact that I pushed myself, and it ended, the lesson was a huge success, and it was wonderful. That's the kind of pushing people out of their comfort zone, where it's like, I'm going to push you out of your comfort zone, but if you fail, you're still a part of the family here, you're still a part of the club, like, good for you for trying. Maybe we'll try it differently next time or something like that. But now it's, what I don't like is that we've gotten to this place of like, well, I'm going to push you out of your comfort zone, and if you fail, you're out of here. That to me is like, and I get it, businesses need to be profitable and they need to make money and all that stuff. But if you have these companies that have 50% turnover rates, within 3 years, it's like, who's really swimming here? Who's really surviving? And then 5 years down the road, like, you have everyone except for senior management is a completely different face. I'm like, who's really being served by this system?
Yeah, and also not to mention that to rehire employees that have left not only is extremely time consuming, but it's extremely expensive because these larger companies use recruiters, obviously, and the recruiter gets paid, anywhere from 10 to 20% per employee. So if you're basically $100,000 employee, that's $20,000 that you're paying every
So
3 years just to withstand, basically cover your ass because you screwed up. Bringing on that idea of you need to fail, and if you're failing, that means you're actually failing forward, which means you're succeeding. So obviously you don't want to like completely bomb and like make the company bankrupt and do all these bad things, but like think of the
yeah.
guy who got the boat stuck in the Suez Canal. Like he will never ever do that again in his life. Like he will live that down for the rest of his life.
There's a difference between trying your hardest and failing and pure negligence. Like, if you're just like, "Psh, whatever, I failed, I don't care." All right, well, now you should be written up, or now there is like probable cause to get rid of you. But if it's like, if you work that 14-hour day and then you failed, come on now. It's like, like do you want this person to grow, or do you want them to become completely jaded for the rest of their life? So
Yeah.
that's the kind of balance that we don't have. We don't have that balance of like, all right, we're not saying to be, a permanent loser. We're not saying to permanently intentionally fail and just get moved to the most easiest cushiony things to do. Like you're not going to be on life support forever, but at the same time, the people who are, jumping off those cliffs and taking those risks, we need to take care of them.
Yeah.
The last thing I kind of want to talk to you about, and again, it's like we keep aiming for the ultimate meaning, and then we get like sidestepped. But here, but
Such
here,
a big topic, like it's such a jam-packed topic. So many different angles to cover.
I'm wondering, like, when you were working for this real estate company. And it's the timing of this episode is so perfect because I was just listening to another podcast about how a lot of real estate companies are now just selling exclusively to investors and not like to young couples starting a family. The people who would traditionally buy homes, they're selling more to like investors who are looking to flip these houses, looking to rent these houses out. So I'm wondering, like, if when you were working for this real estate company, if someone had, taken the time and you had seen like a family come through the door and be like, oh my God, this is a dream come true. We're, thanks to you guys, we're buying our dream home. And if you had more images of that in your mind, even if the people, even if there were a lot of things about the job that was, pure drudgery, if you had those moments of like a young couple getting the keys to their first house, think of this idea of like a baker making the perfect cake for a kid's birthday. And like, yeah, it took a lot of work to make that cake. It took a lot of time, and you had to have a lot of, motor skills to do it. But then you see the end result. You see someone smiling. You see that, kid, oh my God, Super Mario on my birthday cake. Like you see that like end product, and it makes it all worth it. But when you're also working for a place and you don't really see that, you don't see that like average day person benefiting from the fruits of your labor, does that make like your job that much harder as well?
Oh yeah. And also it like a perfect example is we had a project in the Bronx, which I wasn't familiar with until this project, which was amazing to not only understand the culture, but get to really understand just, people always say, oh, the Bronx, like it's a rough area. Like it is. It is. And here we are, this real estate company that bought up a ton of land. We're developing this property, and it's supposed to be like super fancy and like, basically the Ritz of the Bronx. And yeah, that's great, but like no one there can afford it. Like, what are you doing for the community? That's what, like, they did one thing, and that's what they do around Thanksgiving where they give out turkeys. Like, that's nice, but like, that's the one thing you're doing for the community is like, after all the money that you're making from this and all the money that you're injecting into your own portfolio, the only thing you're doing is giving back turkeys on one day a year. Like, sorry, that doesn't cut it. At first, I was really enjoying it because right on the surface, I'm thinking I'm giving back to the community because we're told, oh, we do all this community service. We do, all these coat drives. We do all this stuff, right? A lot of fluff. But then when you really get into the nitty gritty of it, you you just feel like a gear in a money machine. Like really. I mean, and if you try to bring some sort of average person, some mom and pop shop, anything like that, it's not going to fly. And it's not because they're 100% being like, no, we won't take them. It's just like, a mom and pop Ace hardware type of store, no logo, no, it's just like mom and pop's hardware store would never make it because it's not cool enough, or, they don't have you have to have a certain number of capital or like insurance for it, and they probably won't. It almost seems like they would make the requirements for it so high that no one could be there except for the Facebooks, the Googles, these major corporations. So unless you're like a really cool like startup coffee shop that just like happens to be like cool for the bougie type of, hipsters that are trying to get live there, you're not going to be included. It's just not going to happen.
No, wow. Now, this what you're saying is so true because, I think of like what's that movie? It's a Wonderful Life, and like you think of the like classic loan officer who's like working at a bank, and then they see that small business owner like, geez, I have an idea for a hardware store, and you're the guy who writes him the check, and then you have that like feel good moment where you see some honest person walking through the offices of a bank, you're writing them a check, and they get to start their dream. They get to start a hardware store. They get to buy that house for their family. That I think is really important. And just as you said, you build all these houses, and I think you could speak more to this. I noticed, like living in New York City my entire life, one of the kinds of buildings, one of the developments that's really in vogue right now is those like fancy apartment complexes that are like the windows are transparent. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Basically, it's just all glass.
Yeah, it's all glass. And sometimes, I was riding like anytime I would ride the number 4 train or the number 7 train, those are like the trains that run outside. Sometimes I would look through the glass into some of these apartment complexes, especially like, Long Island City, there's a lot of those kinds of
Oh,
buildings
yeah.
out there,
Yeah.
tons of them. And what I notice is that they're all freaking empty. Like I just like I'm
Yeah.
staring there and I see no one living there. I see no people. I see no one looking out the window. I see no furniture. A lot of these very expensive luxury condominiums are just completely empty. I don't see anyone living there at all. And I'm like,
Because
who
they're
is
living at the office
yeah,
too,
they're
you
living in
know?
the office. Or what I think is I think that a lot of these, what they do is they have these expensive developments. Some kind of, person who has money buys them up, buys the units up, but then that person struggles to rent them out because who can really afford, who in their right mind is gonna pay $3,200 to live in a freaking studio made out of glass?
Yeah.
No one in their right mind is able to rent out that studio. So a lot of these properties just end up like the developer makes their money because they're selling the property, but then the
Hmm.
person who buys it is losing money because they can't even find anyone who can possibly afford to rent these things out. So a
Yeah.
lot of these developments are not actually helping the communities in which they're built in. They're just literally there collecting dust, swaying in the wind.
I mean, they do have a lot of perks, which is again, it's very similar in the sense of a corporate job where like you're paying, like the $3,200 a month, like that sucks. Like I'm working the 40 hours, 50, 60 hours a week. That sucks. But I get Nature Valley bars, and at this complex you get a gym. So there's like all these fluff. No, really, but it's all this fluff on this, on this apartment building. You get a gym and you have a doorman and you have an on-roof, access that has a dog walk, and then you get like windows that are like energy conserving and like all this fluff to make you forget about the money you're paying and all the hours you're putting in for your job. And really, when you tear the fluff away, and you see what it is for itself, it's not worth it for me. And that's
Yeah,
another reason why I left my apartment, because honestly, if I wasn't living there and working there for all of last year when I was working remotely, even COVID, it would be probably one of the biggest wastes of money I've ever had, really. Because I
yeah,
would be at the office all day long and I would come home and the only thing I would do at the apartment is sleep. That's it. That's a waste of money. It
yes.
is.
No, you're absolutely right. It's like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. It's like you work all these hours to have a place that you're proud of, but then you're working all those hours, you don't actually even get to enjoy it. And then you are like, all right, well, I'm making all this great money, but wait a minute now. Now all your great money is going straight into rent. This is not equity that you're building. This is not something that is going to appreciate over time. You're just literally turning that money over to some landlord and you'll never see it again. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of trappings of urban life in particular that are going on. And I think that on all fronts, in terms of like working conditions, in terms of pay, and in terms of that meaning, I think we're being hit. I think our generation is being hit on so many angles. And I kind of want to end this episode by kind of clearing some stuff up here. There's this idea that millennials and Generation Z we're really lazy. Like we're really just lazy, like to do nothing all day. We like to take a blanket and just go in the middle of Central Park, just sit in the sun and just go and there's this like image, and it's a persistent image, but it's just not true. It's really not true at all when you look at all the hours that our generation is working, and for what little that we're getting out of it, and what little value, what value. I mean, if let's just say I was a loan officer, and let's just say the year is 1949 or something like that. I have my 8-hour workday. I get to I do work that, okay, maybe it's not the most pleasant, and my manager chews me out every now and then. But then, once a week, I do have that success story where that guy who wants to open up a hardware store went through my offices. So I'm able to rest my head at night knowing, all right, I helped someone start their dream today. When you compare that standard of purpose, money, value, time, energy, when you just look at all of the variables, of course you're going to be a lot more optimistic about the future when you're living under those conditions.
But on the positive, I do want to say that I think us Gen Zers and millennials have so much opportunity that people before us didn't. So you physically had to be at a job to make money, whereas now people do affiliate marketing, they have content creation, they have social media stuff. I mean, you could run a whole online business and make money passively and be in Costa Rica. Like to me, they might call me lazy, but I don't call myself lazy. I'm calling myself smart, like using what resources I have. But also like you wouldn't be able to have this podcast. I wouldn't be able to be making a podcast because it just wouldn't be, unless you were a producer and we're in a studio and had like a ton of money to put in it, like it wouldn't happen. So that's amazing. But yeah, when my parents were like, oh, I fudged my documents to get our first house, like that would never happen nowadays. Like it would never happen. Everything's online. Nothing can be cheated that way. Like it's not the same.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully the bank doesn't find out about your parents' house right now. um, yeah, no, I think that's the perfect balance. Let's keep 21st century technology and innovation, but let's go back to a more classical working standard. Gabby,
Totally.
thank you so much for being on the show today, and we will have the link to Gabby's new podcast, Corporate Quitter, in the
Woo!
description down below. Thank you
So
so much, Gabby.
excited. Thanks for having me.
This concludes the 119th episode of the Truth Island podcast. I'm Aaron Azrod.